So I am not what you would call a physical therapy scientist or anything of that nature. But the premise of this episode seems a little dangerous beyond the Rangers just being Rangers. I am currently on season one, episode five, The Pressing Engagement. This is where we go from haranguing on teamwork, and we're going to move from haranguing on teamwork into the individual power episodes. And they're not all incredibly even. A pressing engagement is going to come in pretty middle of the pack, I think, in this one, for a couple of reasons. I think the first reason is that I know this was a show for kids, but it seems like a bench press record of 1,009 of pretty much any weight seems like something that should not be encouraged. For a show that's all about health and about the dare movement and about like gymnastics and karate, that seems like a lot. I guess it works for kids because kids don't know that ambition should have like some limitations that are healthy, like boundaries. Um, but I kind of marvel at the fact that they have Jason do 1,007 of these things before Rita attacks. Of course, we only see four or five, and they use Ernie and Bulk for comedic effect, and a little bit of Zach and Kimberly. Um, I think there's a couple of things that saved this episode, but overall, if this wasn't a Jason themed episode, um, it wouldn't be as strong. If it had more of a framing about the other Rangers, it would be stronger, which is weird because this is one of those episodes early on where they're still harping on teamwork because they even actually say teamwork during the battle. But there's a couple of ways in which they set it up where that doesn't work. I did, and there's some questions in my mind about continuity, such as Finster being able to create monsters that can break the connection to the Morphin grid teleportation. I know why they do it in this episode. This is an episode that kind of struggles under the weight of all of the Sentai footage. Because in the Sentai, King Sphinx essentially is a quizmaster that like uses his wings to send you to an alternate dimension. In some way, that version of King Sphinx is much stronger than this one. In this episode, King Sphinx is just sort of a secondary to Goldar, but King Sphinx on his own is a very, very powerful monster. So he's kind of utilized less here than Chunky Chicken that we're going to see than Pudgy Pig was. I need to know a little bit more about Finster. We're going to get some more about Finster. He starts to kind of grow out of this episode, but I don't think among the many plot threads that we get out of the Power Ranger universe, the fact that Finster can create monsters or Rita has the ability to break the connection teleportation to the command center to Zordon actually says a lot about the power that Rita doesn't really seem to use. I don't know if it's an energy thing where she can only do it once and then she has to recharge it. But even in the limits of a kid show, I feel like if this were like Wings Club or TMNT with Shredder, it would come up again. And for the life of me, outside of this episode and the Pudgy Pig episode and a little bit of Eye Guy coming up, we don't get a lot of the I can break and teleport the Rangers away from each other kind of thing. It feels like they all loaded them in earlier in the series, and then we're going to get Tommy, who becomes a whole other issue. Um, I really thought I was going to like pressing engagement more because I was looking forward to the moving forward format where it's like individual Rangers get individual things. And I'm a big fan of Jason, so I'm a big fan of Jason episodes for a bunch of reasons. Um, but this episode left me pretty unsatisfied. Kimberly and Billy, especially in a pressing engagement, except for some stuff Kimberly does at the beginning and the end, just basically standing around while Jason is trying to break his bench press record. For some reason, Kimberly is the only one there out of his friends, but a whole bunch of people are cheering him on, and then they just she distracts the crowd with her bubble blowing, and it throws Jason off. And for some reason, Rita thinks this means that she can go after Jason because he has no confidence. It's a very weak, like, lack of confidence thing. Because like I can't imagine a guy that teaches karate class couldn't bounce back from this fairly easily. And Austin St. John never really feels like he's lost his confidence. They don't really give him time to. This is a weirdly paced episode. Like the pacing of the episode up until the announcement of the power crystals is fine. It's a little bit of that same thing that I had with I think it was Teamwork, where they were all where there was too many things happening at once. But now it feels the resolution isn't satisfying, even from the Ranger point of view. Also, the battle goes on for a lot longer. I don't know if they were just looking for a reason to start using more of the Zord footage, or if they were looking for a reason to really showcase the difference between what's called tank mode and battle mode, which is tank mode is the one where it's all the animals facing forward and they're going to use electric beams like they did in the pilot. And then battle mode is Megazord mode, which they also called Megazord mode, which could be very confusing for consumers slash children. Um, and it all kind of is in service to bringing in the power crystals, which isn't bad. I think the power crystals are very elegant. They're sort of a MacGuffin of the series in which they're going to present this option of the Power Rangers can find each other anywhere, and then they're never used again. We're going to see a lot of those in the next few episodes. There's one coming up that's very troubling, actually. Um, it's very much like I can see the cracks, especially in this episode and in an episode coming up that I'm going to talk about. Um, in regards to where you can see the difference between the Sentai and American footage, and when the American version of Sentai, the Power Rangers, loses its step, it kind of loses it a little hard. Not in this episode, but I think just because the episodes follow up are mostly individual episodes for a little bit, it's hard not to compare them. And in comparison wise, a pressing engagement doesn't do as well as a different drum, doesn't do as well as I Guy. Um, it's a very thin, let's get Jason alone premise. I think it's because I've seen the Sentai episode and King Sphinx as this Quizmaster character is a lot more high fantasy, and I think it's a better concept and makes him more. This this version of King Sphinx isn't as dangerous, which is very strange. Because he has all the marks of something that could be a very dangerous villain. In fact, in merchandising, he's one of the main villains on, I think, one of the board games, actually. Like he appears the main kind of villain if you just look at merchandising. And this episode really does not give him enough to do. It brings Goldar in with him, which I don't know if you like. It feels like the episode with the skeleton sombrero guy that gets the Rangers on their own. You could just repeat that very successfully. Like Goldar is important because he's a villain, but he's not actually important to this episode. Um, it's this interesting thing too of the power crystals sort of solve a problem that we hadn't had yet, and one that I wouldn't have thought about that would be a minor plot point. It seems to me if you can't teleport to the command center and can't communicate with Zordon, that is a much bigger plot point, and it's never explained why it goes offline. Maybe it doesn't later, and I'm just misremembering it. But it seems weird that just for this episode, it's for kids, so they don't have to explain it. But as an adult, as a TTRPG creator, the idea of not being able to communicate is sort of a linchpin of something that I have in my tabletop game that is like a Herald of Doom, and to just have it be like a one-off thing. The Rangers just kind of accept it nonchalantly, but it's kind of a big deal. Um, a pressing engagement as well. I don't know. I like the idea of the power crystals as a way to get past teleportation and have a new way for them to teleport. I actually like their like standing somersault power crystal attack almost more than I love the power blaster. Um, I think it looks more stylized. They do some really cool stylized stuff with the power sword in the next couple episodes. I think the thing that bothers me most is that I can't reconcile the Jason that I know with the Jason that is so hard knocked off his confidence that Rita notices in this episode. because he does feel bad, but there's not enough in the episode about anyone comforting him or giving him a way to get his groove back that isn't about him being a Power Ranger. And it doesn't really work with the tone of the show in some ways. It feels a very like shoehorny, we're gonna talk about teamwork sort of thing in a way that doesn't really fit the other teamwork episodes in a way. This ends up kind of middle of the pack. I'm gonna put out Shorty's list with the first 5 episodes kind of in ranked, and it sort of comes in the middle because it's not quite as bad as Food Fight in tone or in pacing. It just barely squeaks above Teamwork, but it's definitely not as good as High Five. I think if you're looking for an episode to talk about teamwork and what they do and learning to work together, High Five is still kind of a pinnacle. Um, Pressing Engagement isn't bad. I don't think it's going to be in the top 5 for very long. I think it's in the top 5 by virtue of there only being 5 entries currently. Um, but yeah, I think it's a little bit of a waste. And I know this is partially about the time slot and this being for kids, but this show kind of dives into some issues. I mean, never much, and it doesn't go too after school special, but it does sort of dive into issues of self-worth and community and the choices that we make and how we care for each other. It gets there slowly, but it does get there. I feel like we wouldn't have responded to it if it didn't get there. I just don't think a pressing engagement. I don't want to say it's not a good episode, but in the way that it showcases both Jason and the way it kind of sidelines all of the Rangers except for Kim, kind of. I do love seeing Zach on a skateboard, which is neat because I don't think we see much of that, but because we're going to see James Davies later as uh, as a ranger on a skateboard, I love a nod to that, which is really cool. I love seeing Kim practice her gymnastics routines, which we don't see a lot of as much as I'd like. Um, King Sphinx too has this interesting power where he can re-teleport the Rangers to last place they were and demorph them. They could have done more with that. It just feels like King Sphinx is not as utilized as he could be, and he could be a real danger. And there are some coming up monsters that feel like they aren't as much of a danger until they do stuff, and King Sphinx feels underutilized. Um, I would also like to say, for as much as Bulk is sort of the buffoon of the series, the head of the punks, anyone that can bench press 1,009 of any weight, because there's a couple of plates on there. I can't imagine. I can't see a number for how much it is, but it looks like maybe we're gonna say 40-pound plate. So let's say it's bench pressing 1,009, 200 pounds. It's not nothing. And the fact that he set that record and never gets to reclaim that is kind of interesting and bittersweet. I will say in these episodes, they do strike a better balance in the episodes coming up of Bulk and Skull as, mini antagonist anti-hero. It's less snarky. It's still a little bit reminder that they're teenagers and they don't always make, the right choices. Um, but it's less of an issue in these episodes. We see a lot of like Bulk splitting his pants, which is kind of weird because no other character goes through this in the entire show. Um, yeah, but that's a pressing engagement. I'm actually trying to struggle to like say things about it that would give you a lot of information about it. It feels like it's both a quintessential Ranger episode where you can point to and be like, oh, this is how they escalate. But it wouldn't make a good tabletop game episode because a couple of these plot threads, like the idea that they can't reach the command center or they aren't all together going to the command center because um, Trini and Billy don't actually join Zach and Kim at the command center until they're needed for the crystals. They're not in the episode at all, which means one, they either didn't know Jason was breaking this record, or two, they were so busy they prioritized something else. But they made this seem like it was really important to Jason. And we're going to see this come up again in better episodes where Jason gets in competition mode. All the characters have this streak of competitiveness to them, but it feels like that's part of not the shadow version of the Red Ranger is this competition and ambition piece, but like that it's kind of the natural part of his courage is this idealized version of competition that is both a positive and negative. So I will say that's kind of interesting. And I think there's something about that in a tabletop game space. I would have done something different about it. I think if I hadn't seen the Sentai episode with King Sphinx and his kind of Quizmaster persona, I'd have a different feel about it. Um, I still think I'd be let down a little bit because it's weird that Billy and Trini are just off somewhere else because they don't get called at all. There are several episodes in the future where the Rangers are in different spaces and they all meet up and they get called. Here in the individual episodes at the start of the series, they're actually going to run into a space where the other Rangers are, which means Zordon hasn't contacted them. Zordon doesn't do a lot of omnipotency in these next few episodes, which is weird because he is, but he's not. And it's sort of a line that when you do tabletop gaming, you have to figure out how much you want your mentor to know, which is what Zordon is. Um, yeah, it's pressing engagement. It's not good, it's not bad. It's kind of middle of the road for the first five episodes, and I'm curious to see how long it'll stay where it is. How long it'll even stay in the top 10. Um, it's fine. I love a good Jason themed episode. I'm excited for episodes that shine a spotlight on other characters. It's easy to focus on like Jason and Kim. So it'll be great to get, the rest of the Rangers having their own episodes. Definitely all five have ways that they are like breakout stars in the series, and so I'm excited for really cool episodes. And some of these monsters coming up are some of the most iconic. Almost all of the monsters in the first 10 episodes, I feel like, are the ones people remember, like really hardcore. So I'm excited to see kind of what comes after the stuff that I remember acutely. And when it starts being episodes that I definitely saw when I was little, but I don't really remember, just because, again, the first three seasons, the first 65 episodes are technically three seasons and at least a movie, kind of thing. I am going to try to cut it off like after the Stone Canyon kids get there. I think I'll probably make that arbitrarily season two for this, but we'll actually see what I end up doing. Yeah, but a pressing engagement. If you're watching it on YouTube, for some reason, it's episode four in some places and episode five in others, but I'm going by the episode listing on Google. And so it's technically five, and I think it works as five. We're not really, also as a tabletop game master, we don't get enough space from the power weapons to the power crystals, and also the name power is in both of them, which I don't think I'd be able to do because I'd get them confused the whole time. I do like the power crystals. I think they're a really cool way to modify the Megazord because they have like a joystick persona to them in a solid place. Um, yeah, so press engagement is pretty good. Pacing is a little meh. The premise is just thin enough that an adult can see through it, but for a kid, it's not that big a deal because the kid's not going to be like, why is 1,000 bench presses a big deal? And like as an adult, I'm thinking, oh my God, 1,010? Like, how are you punching anything after this? Um, the juice bar continues to be kind of amusing and fun, and I appreciate kind of Ernie as a mentor and a safeguard. I did appreciate the softening of Bulk and Skull. They're still, punks, but they're not like end of the world punks, which I appreciate. Um, yeah, so pressing engagement. The next one after pressing engagement is going to be a different drum, which I think is a really cool special episode because it is a special episode because again, the show came out in the early 90s. So it's just like the tail end of we're doing special episodes, but this is definitely different drum coming up, which is better than impressing engagement in some ways, is definitely special episode material. But I think, ironically, the Power Rangers is one of the shows that did these special episodes really, really well when they did them. with intent and heart. And I think we're going to see that. And I feel like I'm missing a bit of that intention here in pressing engagement. And again, it's sort of there's some wasted through threads that do include King Sphinx being a very, very powerful opponent in the Sentai world. But it is what it is. And as Zordon would say, and as we move into the colder months, I say, may the power protect you.